Have you ever asked yourself this simple but haunting question? What is the greatest enemy you will ever face in your lifetime? Is it someone out there in the world waiting to sabotage you? Or could it be something lurking within you, hidden deep in the corners of your own soul? Take a moment. Feel that question settle inside you. Let it ripple through your thoughts. Because today, we are diving into a truth so raw, so powerful, that once you see it, you can never unsee it again. Welcome to our journey today, where we peel back the layers of illusion and stare directly into the shadow within us, the dark mirror that Carl Jung, one of the greatest minds in psychology, urged every human being to confront. Jung didn't simply study human behavior like many others before him. No, he dared to suggest something far more uncomfortable, far more profound, that within each of us lies a hidden, unconscious self, a side we would rather deny, a side we fear, a side we desperately try to hide, not just from the world, but from ourselves. Think about moments in your own life. That instant rage you feel in traffic when someone cuts you off. The jealousy that flashes when your best friend gets a promotion you secretly wanted. The self-doubt that whispers you're never enough. We push these feelings down, don't we? We plaster smiles over them. We distract ourselves with work, entertainment, relationships, anything to avoid admitting there's darkness within us too. But Jung taught us that ignoring the shadow doesn't make it go away. In fact, it makes it stronger. It festers. It leaks out in subtle ways. In our fears, our projections onto others, our repeated mistakes, and our endless search for fulfillment outside ourselves. He introduced the revolutionary concept of the shadow self, the hidden, repressed part of our personality that holds not only all the traits we deny, but also enormous potential for growth and transformation. The shadow isn't just made of rage, greed, jealousy, or fear. It also contains suppressed creativity, passion, authenticity, and parts of ourselves we were told were wrong or unacceptable when we were children. Imagine a garden locked away behind a wall. If neglected, it turns into a wild, tangled mess. But if you open the gate, tend the soil, pull out the weeds, nourish the roots within, that chaos blooms a life force stronger than you ever imagined. Our culture teaches us to fear the dark. From the time we're little kids, we're warned, don't go into the dark woods, don't stay out after dark, don't trust the unknown. Darkness becomes a symbol of everything bad, everything to be avoided. But what if darkness isn't evil? What if darkness is simply the parts of ourselves we haven't yet learned to love? Look at stories we all know: Harry Potter facing the darkness within himself, Luke Skywalker confronting the temptation of the dark side, Frodo Baggins burdened by the power of the One Ring. These aren't just fantasy tales. They are metaphors for what Jung called the hero's journey inward. The real battle is never out there, it's always within. I know some of you watching might be thinking, well, I'm a good person. I don't have a dark side. Let me challenge you gently. If you've ever judged someone harshly, if you've ever lied to protect yourself, if you've ever envied someone else's success, if you've ever sabotaged your own happiness because deep down you didn't believe you deserved it, that's your shadow whispering. It's not about being a bad person. It's about being a whole person. Carl Jung famously said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." True healing doesn't come from pretending to be perfect. It comes from courageously, compassionately turning toward the parts of ourselves we have abandoned and saying, "I see you. You are part of me too." Let me give you a simple, relatable example. Imagine a workplace scenario. You're working hard, doing everything right, and then one day, a colleague is praised publicly for an idea you secretly think was yours. You smile politely, but deep inside you feel a flash of resentment. Instead of acknowledging it, you tell yourself, "I'm not petty. I shouldn't feel that way." And so you stuff it down. But the next week, you find yourself snapping at that same colleague over something trivial. You're passive-aggressive in meetings. You don't even realize why you feel so irritated every time they speak. That's shadow behavior. You didn't deal with the resentment consciously, so it found its own way to express itself destructively. Now imagine if, instead, you had said to yourself, "Wow, I'm feeling envious. I'm human. I wanted that recognition too." By acknowledging the feeling without judgment, you take away its power to control you. You learn from it. You grow. This is the kind of inner work Carl Jung called us to do. It's hard. It's messy. It requires humility, self-honesty, and deep compassion. But the reward? Freedom, wholeness, power. Today, in this video, we're not just going to talk about theories. We're going to explore how to actually begin recognizing and working with your shadow self in real life. How it shows up in your relationships, your career, your parenting, your creativity, even your health. And more importantly, how embracing your shadow could be the single greatest key to unlocking your true potential. Before we dive deeper, if this message is already resonating with you even a little, please take a second to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone you care about. Your support truly helps us continue creating content that digs deep into the human spirit, not just surface-level feel-good talks. And if you feel called to go the extra mile, you can send a super thanks donation. It directly fuels our mission to spread authentic, transformative ideas to the world. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. All right, deep breath. Ready? Let's begin our descent not into darkness as fear, but into darkness as discovery. Because the truth is, what you are willing to face inside yourself, you are no longer enslaved by. And maybe, just maybe, the very parts you fear the most are holding the treasures you seek. Stay with me till the end, because by the time we finish this journey together, you won't just understand your shadow, you'll know how to dance with it. And that changes everything. When we talk about the great pioneers of psychology, few names carry as much weight and fascination as Carl Gustav Jung. Jung wasn't just another psychologist building theories in the shadow of his predecessors. He was an architect of the soul, a man who dared to map out not only the conscious mind, but the vast, mysterious territories lying beneath the surface of awareness. He proposed that human beings are far more than just machines of instinct and logic, that within each of us lies an entire universe, shaped by forces we barely understand, but which deeply influence every moment of our lives. Carl Jung was born in Switzerland in 1875 into a family steeped in religious and intellectual tradition. His early experiences with loneliness, spirituality, and philosophical inquiry set the stage for his life's work. From an early age, Jung was fascinated by the invisible, the dreams, symbols, and inner voices that seemed to hold truths deeper than anything taught in school or church. This fascination would become the cornerstone of his professional and personal journey, leading him to explore the deepest layers of human consciousness. His early career was closely tied to Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis. In fact, when they first met in 1907, the two reportedly talked for 13 straight hours, an intense meeting of minds that seemed destined to change the course of psychology forever. Freud saw Jung as his natural heir, the one who would carry the torch of psychoanalysis into the future. For a time, they were inseparable, almost like a father and son bound by a shared mission. They worked together to establish psychoanalysis as a legitimate field of study, battling public skepticism and academic resistance. But as time passed, cracks began to appear in their alliance. Freud believed that human behavior was primarily driven by repressed sexual desires. He framed the unconscious as a dark cellar filled with forbidden impulses society demanded we suppress. Jung, however, saw something more expansive. To him, the unconscious was not just a dumping ground for the unacceptable parts of ourselves, it was a wellspring of creativity, wisdom, and universal connection. Jung respected Freud's early theories, but felt they only scratched the surface of what the human mind truly contained. Where Freud saw a battleground of primal urges, Jung envisioned a vast, rich landscape teeming with ancient symbols, archetypes, and shared human experiences. This fundamental disagreement was too profound to ignore. Jung wanted to explore spirituality, mythology, dreams, and the timeless symbols that appeared across cultures and epics. Freud, a strict materialist, dismissed these interests as mystical nonsense. Eventually, the tension between them reached a breaking point, and in 1913, Jung and Freud parted ways, a split that deeply wounded both men. Jung later described this period as one of the most painful times of his life, psychological death that forced him into a long, inward journey to reconstruct his identity and philosophy from the ground up. It was during this dark night of the soul that Jung's most revolutionary contributions to psychology began to take shape. One of his key ideas was the concept of the personal unconscious, which, like Freud's unconscious, contained repressed memories and forgotten experiences unique to each individual. But Jung didn't stop there. He introduced the groundbreaking idea of the collective unconscious, a level of the psyche that all humans share, regardless of culture, language, or personal experience. The collective unconscious is like a massive underground river flowing beneath the entire human race. It carries the shared memories, instincts, and symbols inherited from our ancestors, stretching back to the dawn of humanity. Jung argued that within this collective realm exist archetypes, universal patterns or motifs that shape human behavior and imagination. These archetypes appear across cultures and eras, in myths, fairy tales, religions, and dreams. Whether it's the hero embarking on a quest, the nurturing mother figure, or the wise old man offering cryptic advice, these recurring images reflect fundamental aspects of the human experience. Imagine watching a superhero movie today, something like Spider-Man or Wonder Woman. The journey the hero takes, facing trials, experiencing loss, grappling with inner conflict before ultimately rising to fulfill their destiny, follows the same archetypal blueprint that ancient myths like Hercules, Gilgamesh, or King Arthur once laid down thousands of years ago. These stories feel familiar to us, not because we've seen them before, but because they are embedded deep within our collective unconscious. They're part of what it means to be human. In the everyday world, we also encounter these archetypes constantly, often without realizing it. Think about the mentor archetype, embodied in figures like Dumbledore from Harry Potter or Mr. Miyagi from The Karate Kid. Or consider the shadow archetype, the villainous force that represents the darker side of the protagonist's nature, Darth Vader, Voldemort, or even characters like Tony Montana and Scarface, who start as ambitious but are ultimately consumed by their own inner demons. Jung saw these patterns not as simple storytelling devices, but as essential mirrors reflecting the struggles, hopes, and fears within each of us. Jung's theories opened up new frontiers not just in psychology, but in literature, religion, art, and even pop culture. His influence spread far beyond the walls of the therapist's office. Today, entire fields like depth psychology, dream analysis, and archetypal criticism owe their existence to his groundbreaking ideas. One of the most compelling aspects of Jung's work was his view of the human soul as something far grander than modern science often portrays. While Freud confined his theories to the realms of sexuality and survival, Jung embraced the mystery and richness of human existence. He was willing to walk into the realms of myth, spirituality, and symbolism, not to explain them away as primitive delusions, but to show how deeply they are woven into the fabric of our being. When you think about it, how else can we explain the universal longing for meaning, the hunger for connection to something greater than ourselves, the drive to tell stories that endure for millennia? Jung believed that within each person lies not just a set of biological instincts, but a profound quest for individuation, the lifelong journey to become the truest, fullest version of oneself, integrating both the conscious and unconscious aspects of the psyche. This is what sets Jung apart from Freud in such a profound way. Freud viewed the unconscious primarily as a storage room for unwanted desires. Jung saw it as a treasure trove, containing not only the roots of our neuroses, but also the seeds of our greatest strengths. The unconscious, for Jung, was not just a problem to be solved, it was a mystery to be explored, a dynamic force that, when understood and integrated, could lead to unimaginable personal transformation. Consider real-world examples of Jung's impact. Modern therapy practices like shadow work, dream interpretation, and active imagination exercises are directly rooted in his ideas. Even a Myers-Briggs type indicator, MBTI, one of the most widely used personality tests in the world, is based on Jung's theories of psychological types. When you hear someone describe themselves as an INFJ or ENTP, they're unknowingly referencing concepts Jung developed over a century ago. In popular culture, movies like Inception, The Matrix, or even Disney's Inside Out are drenched in Jungian themes. They explore the idea that reality is shaped not only by external circumstances, but by the complex inner worlds we all carry inside. Our fears, desires, projections, and unconscious patterns create the lens through which we see and experience life. Carl Jung's legacy challenges us to go deeper, not to settle for a shallow understanding of ourselves or others, not to reduce human beings to a set of mechanical behaviors or chemical impulses. He invites us into the mystery. He invites us to embrace the contradictions within us, the light and the dark, the rational and the irrational, the known and the unknown. In our daily lives, this means recognizing that the conflicts we experience with others are often reflections of the unresolved conflicts within ourselves. It means understanding that the dreams we dismiss as meaningless may hold vital messages from parts of our psyche we have neglected. It means acknowledging that the person we envy, the person we despise, and even the person we idolize all represent aspects of ourselves we either reject or long to cultivate. To walk the path Jung laid out is not easy. It requires immense courage to look inward, to question one's assumptions, to confront one's shadow, and to listen to the silent wisdom of the unconscious. It's far easier to blame others, to seek validation from external achievements, to distract ourselves with busyness or entertainment. But Jung knew that true fulfillment, true wholeness only comes when we turn inward, when we dare to face the vast, uncharted territory within our own souls. He once wrote, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." This simple yet profound statement encapsulates his entire philosophy. The external world is important, but it can never fully satisfy the deep longing that stirs within us. Only by making the unconscious conscious can we truly awaken to the fullness of life. In the end, Carl Jung was not merely a psychologist. He was a visionary, a bridge between the worlds of science and spirit, a guide for all who seek to understand themselves beyond the masks they wear in daily life. His work remains as vital today as it was a century ago, perhaps even more so in a world increasingly disconnected from its own inner depths. For anyone willing to embark on the journey he mapped out, the rewards are immense. Greater self-awareness, deeper relationships, richer creativity, and a profound sense of meaning and belonging. But it all begins with a simple, courageous act to look within. And once you do, you may discover, as Jung did, that the human soul is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. Of all the ideas Carl Jung introduced to the world, none are perhaps as hauntingly beautiful and profoundly impactful as his concept of the collective unconscious and archetypes. These ideas invite us to imagine that beneath the surface of every human being, regardless of culture, language, or era, there exists a deep, shared reservoir of experiences, symbols, and stories. This is not some poetic metaphor. It's a living reality that shapes the way we think, dream, and act every single day, whether we are aware of it or not. Jung proposed that just as we inherit physical traits from our ancestors through DNA, we also inherit psychological structures, forms of understanding, feeling, and behaving that have been molded and refined through countless generations. He called this shared psychic inheritance the collective unconscious. The collective unconscious is often misunderstood. It's not about shared memories of specific events, like remembering the fall of Rome or the signing of the Declaration of Independence. It's deeper than that. It's like a spiritual data bank, a universal memory system that records not events but patterns, instincts, and symbolic meanings. It holds the emotional truths of humanity, the terror of the unknown, the elation of discovery, the sorrow of loss, the exhilaration of triumph. It's why people from vastly different backgrounds can experience similar dreams. Why ancient myths from opposite sides of the world often mirror each other, and why certain characters, struggles, and journeys seem to resonate across time and place. Central to this collective unconscious are what Jung called archetypes. These are the ancient, universal templates that live within each of us, waiting to be awakened by the experiences of life. Archetypes are not characters per se, but primal patterns that characters embody. They're like skeletal blueprints around which our cultures, myths, and even personal identities are built. They guide the ways we perceive the world, how we understand our place in it, and how we navigate the eternal dramas of existence. Love, conflict, growth, death, and rebirth. Take, for instance, the archetype of the hero. This is one of the most easily recognizable forms, and it has been with us for thousands of years. From the labors of Hercules in ancient Greece to the modern-day exploits of superheroes like Spider-Man or Captain Marvel, the hero archetype captures a universal experience. The individual who is called to adventure, faces trials and enemies, undergoes transformation, and returns stronger, wiser, and ready to serve others. It's the reason why audiences cheer when a young, unassuming figure rises against all odds to defeat evil or injustice. Whether it's Luke Skywalker in Star Wars, Katniss Everdeen in The Hunger Games, or Simba in The Lion King, the narrative resonates deeply because it mirrors our own internal struggles. We are all, at some level, heroes of our own story, called to leave the comfort of the familiar, confront the unknown, and find out who we truly are. The archetype of the mother is another powerful example, woven into the fabric of every society and every heart. Across cultures, the mother represents nurturing, protection, and unconditional love. Whether it's the image of the Virgin Mary in Christian tradition, the figure of Demeter in Greek mythology, or the loving, steadfast mothers in everyday life who hold families together through sacrifice and care. The mother archetype is a force that transcends individual relationships. It embodies the deep human longing for safety, warmth, and connection, the primal memory of being cared for, of belonging to something greater than oneself. When a character like Marmee in Little Women or Aunt May in Spider-Man offers wisdom and unconditional support, we aren't just witnessing a nice narrative device. We are seeing the mother archetype in action, stirring something ancient and comforting inside us. But not all archetypes are gentle and uplifting. Jung also emphasized the shadow, the dark, often frightening reflection of the self. The shadow archetype represents all the parts of ourselves we deny, reject, or fear. It's the villain within, the source of destructive impulses and the darker sides of ambition, envy, and rage. Yet, it's crucial to understand that the shadow is not purely evil. It holds enormous energy, potential, and the keys to parts of ourselves we have not yet mastered. Think of Loki in Norse mythology, the trickster god whose mischief and chaos often lead to both destruction and unexpected growth. Or the Joker from Batman, a character who personifies the chaotic, a moral force lurking beneath the surface of civilized society. We are simultaneously repulsed and fascinated by these figures because they symbolize the battle within each of us, the tension between order and chaos, between the self we show the world and the self we hide even from ourselves. These archetypes are not just relics of ancient stories or Hollywood scripts. They live and breathe within our personal lives. When you find yourself stepping up in a crisis, when you find yourself nurturing a loved one through hardship, or when you wrestle with feelings of jealousy or revenge, you are encountering these archetypal energies firsthand. Archetypes shape the way we interpret experience. They provide the structures for our dreams, our fears, our ambitions, and our conflicts. They are like musical scores silently playing beneath the surface of our actions, guiding the rhythms of our lives. Importantly, archetypes are not rigid cages that trap us into one pattern forever. They are dynamic and fluid, allowing for endless variations and interpretations. One person might express the hero archetype by becoming a firefighter, another by building a nonprofit, another by overcoming personal trauma to raise a family with compassion and strength. The archetype provides the underlying form, the script, if you will, but each individual improvises their own performance based on the unique circumstances of their life. This idea is crucial because it means that engaging with archetypes is not about fitting ourselves into predetermined molds. It's about recognizing the energies at play within us and choosing consciously how to embody them. It's about being the author of our story, not just a character swept along by forces we don't understand. Jung believed that by becoming aware of the archetypes active in our psyche, we could live more authentic, empowered lives. We could tap into the deep well of human wisdom accumulated over centuries and use it to navigate the complexities of modern existence. Think about how advertising, for example, often exploits archetypes to evoke emotional responses. A car commercial doesn't just sell a vehicle. It sells the archetype of the explorer, the rugged individual forging new paths into the unknown. A perfume ad doesn't just promote a scent. It sells the lover the promise of passion, allure, and connection. Political campaigns often invoke the father archetype, the strong, protective leader who will guide the nation through storms. These images work because they tap into something already alive inside us. They speak the language of the collective unconscious, bypassing rational analysis and striking directly at the heart. We see the same dynamic at play in our relationships. How many times have you seen a friend fall for someone who embodies the rescuer archetype, only to later feel trapped or resentful? How often do conflicts arise because two people are unconsciously playing out the warrior and victim roles, clashing in a cycle of attack and retreat? Recognizing the archetypes we are living out and the ones we are projecting onto others can dramatically transform how we relate to ourselves and each other. At its deepest level, Jung's theory suggests that the human experience is not random or meaningless. It follows profound patterns that connect us across time and space. The suffering you endure today echoes the trials faced by heroes in ancient myths. The love you give and receive connects you to the endless lineage of mothers and fathers who nurtured life through the ages. The fears you battle in the quiet hours of the night are the same fears humanity has wrestled with since the dawn of consciousness. This perspective can be incredibly comforting. It means you are never truly alone. Your story is part of a much larger story, one that has been unfolding since humans first gazed at the stars and wondered about their place in the universe. Your struggles, your joys, your dreams, they all matter. They are threads woven into the grand tapestry of human existence. Understanding archetypes doesn't remove the challenges of life, but it does give us a map, a way to navigate the journey with more awareness, courage, and grace. It invites us to become active participants in our own evolution, to recognize the forces at play within us, and to align ourselves with the deepest, most life-affirming patterns available. In this light, the collective unconscious is not some dusty archive of forgotten lore. It's a living, breathing force, a chorus of ancestral voices singing the songs of what it means to be human. And the archetypes are not rigid, suffocating molds. They are musical themes in the symphony of our lives, providing structure but leaving infinite room for individual expression. When we recognize this, we begin to live differently. We stop seeing our problems as isolated failures and start seeing them as invitations to grow into fuller versions of ourselves. We stop fearing the unknown and start embracing it as the birthplace of new possibilities. We stop judging others so harshly, recognizing that they too are grappling with the same timeless forces we are. Jung didn't just give us a theory. He gave us a way of seeing a lens through which the chaotic, painful, beautiful experience of being human becomes not only bearable, but profoundly meaningful. He showed us that the journey inward into the realms of the unconscious and the archetypal is not a retreat from the world, but a deepening of our engagement with it. And so, when we encounter the hero, the mother, the shadow, or any of the countless other archetypes that populate our dreams and our dramas, we are not encountering something foreign. We are encountering parts of ourselves ancient, enduring, and infinitely rich with possibility. Each of us carries the entire human story within us. And by learning to listen to its echoes, we can step into our true power not as puppets of fate, but as conscious co-creators of our destiny. Among the many profound contributions Carl Jung made to our understanding of the human psyche, none strikes a deeper chord or elicits more discomfort than his exploration of the shadow archetype. The shadow is not a villain lurking outside of us, nor is it simply the bad part of our character that needs to be punished or exiled. It is something much more intricate, more intimate. It is the part of ourselves we refuse to see. It is every thought, impulse, and emotion we have judged as unacceptable and have pushed down into the dark basement of our unconscious mind. We lock the door, throw away the key, and tell ourselves the house is clean. But the basement is still there, and everything we shoved into it continues to live, grow, and wait for the moment it can slip back into the light, sometimes in ways we least expect. We fear the shadow because, fundamentally, we fear losing control. We are terrified that if we admit to ourselves that we are capable of rage, jealousy, cruelty, lust, or hatred, then those things will define us. We worry that we are not the good, upstanding people we desperately want to believe we are. In a society that rewards polished personas and punishes vulnerability, the idea of owning up to our darker sides feels like social and personal suicide. So we split ourselves, we curate our image, living only in the narrow slice of our identity that is deemed acceptable. But the truth is, ignoring the shadow doesn't make it disappear. It makes it stronger. It turns it into a force that acts from behind the scenes, sabotaging our best efforts and emerging at the worst possible times. Consider the case of a successful businessman, a man widely admired for his charisma, generosity, and apparent emotional intelligence. To his colleagues, he is the model of professionalism and kindness. But at home, behind closed doors, he is a different person entirely. Small frustrations explode into fits of rage. His family walks on eggshells, never knowing when the next outburst will come. And he, perhaps, genuinely believes he is a good man, blaming stress or circumstances for his behavior without realizing he is being ruled by the very shadow he refuses to acknowledge. This is not an isolated story. We see it everywhere in politicians who campaign for family values while engaging in scandalous behavior, in celebrities who preach humility while treating those around them with cruelty, in the friend who champions honesty but lies compulsively when they feel vulnerable. The shadow emerges precisely where we are most blind to it. It thrives in the dissonance between the image we project and the reality we suppress. There's an old fable that speaks to this truth more clearly than any clinical case study could. It's the story of the blacksmith and the monster. In the story, a skilled blacksmith lived in a peaceful village. Over the years, he became known for his strength and kindness, a man people admired and sought for advice. Yet deep inside, the blacksmith harbored a terrible anger, a resentment he dared not show. Every time he felt slighted, wronged, or powerless, he swallowed his rage, pounding it into the iron he forged but never acknowledging it aloud. Over time, that unspoken fury grew and took shape, an invisible monster that lived in his workshop. unseen by others but fed by the blacksmith's denial. One night, the monster grew so powerful that it broke free, rampaging through the village, destroying homes and harming those the blacksmith loved most. The villagers were horrified. They blamed the blacksmith, but he protested, "It's not me. It's something else. I never meant for this to happen." Yet the monster was his creation, born of everything he refused to face, nurtured by every act of repression. The blacksmith's monster is the perfect metaphor for the shadow. What we refuse to confront in ourselves does not die. It mutates. It grows in the darkness, and eventually, it will find a way out, whether through anger, addiction, sabotage, cruelty, or despair. Jung warned that unless we make the unconscious conscious, it will rule our lives, and we will call it fate. Yet, despite the ominous nature of the shadow, Jung insisted that it is not inherently evil. In fact, the shadow holds vital, even life-affirming energy. Buried in the dark parts of ourselves are not only our most destructive impulses, but also our greatest gifts. Our creativity, our spontaneity, our passion, our ability to assert ourselves and protect what matters. These often lie dormant in the shadow, waiting to be reclaimed. Shadow work is not about eliminating darkness, but integrating it, reclaiming the parts of ourselves we abandoned out of fear or shame. Think of an artist who suppresses their anger to appear agreeable and ends up painting lifeless, soulless works. Only when they allow themselves to access the raw power of their rage do their paintings come alive with authenticity and emotion that moves others. Or consider the quiet, people-pleasing woman who has spent her life accommodating others, suppressing her ambition and strength. Only by confronting the shadow, acknowledging her resentment, her need for recognition, her right to take up space, does she begin to step into her true power, becoming a leader who inspires rather than diminishes. The process of confronting the shadow is not easy. It requires brutal honesty, profound courage, and deep compassion for oneself. It often begins in moments of crisis, when life falls apart, when old coping mechanisms stop working, when we're forced to reckon with who we really are rather than who we pretend to be. These moments, though painful, are opportunities for transformation. They are invitations to become whole. In more familiar everyday terms, imagine someone who's a notorious workaholic. On the surface, they might proudly say, "I'm just dedicated," or "I have a strong work ethic." But underneath, there might be a shadow filled with fear of worthlessness, terror of intimacy, and a desperate need for control. The endless grind isn't just about ambition. It's about running from the parts of themselves they don't want to face. Until they stop and ask, "What am I so afraid of?" They will continue to be driven by forces they don't understand. Popular culture gives us numerous examples of the shadow in action. Tony Stark from the Marvel Cinematic Universe is a classic case. His flamboyance, arrogance, and recklessness are defenses against deep feelings of inadequacy and guilt. His journey across the films is, in many ways, a journey of shadow integration, facing his vulnerabilities, owning his past mistakes, and ultimately transforming his ego-driven persona into one of genuine heroism and sacrifice. Another example is Walter White from Breaking Bad. Walter starts as a seemingly mild-mannered chemistry teacher, but beneath his facade lies a deep well of resentment, pride, and thirst for power. As the story unfolds, his shadow completely consumes him, turning him into a ruthless figure he never imagined he could become. The tragedy is not that the shadow existed, but that Walter refused to acknowledge or integrate it early enough to steer his life toward a different outcome. Jung believed that when we fail to recognize our own shadow, we're doomed to project it onto others. We see in them the traits we despise or fear in ourselves. This is why gossip thrives, why witch hunts happen, why political polarization becomes so toxic. When two people or two groups are locked in vicious conflict, Each side often embodies the shadow of the other, each blaming the other for the very qualities they cannot admit exist within themselves. But if we can summon the courage to own our shadows, we gain incredible freedom. We are no longer slaves to hidden forces. We are no longer caught in endless cycles of blame, resentment, and self-sabotage. We begin to see ourselves and others with greater clarity and compassion. We gain access to energies and talents we never knew we had. We become more authentic, more powerful, and more capable of living fully. Shadow work isn't about perfection. It's about wholeness. It's about embracing the full spectrum of our humanity, the light and the dark, the noble and the base, the sacred and the profane. Only by doing so can we become truly alive, not fragmented, fearful versions of ourselves. In essence, the shadow is not our enemy. It is our neglected ally. It is the guardian of parts of ourselves that have been lost, shamed, or forgotten. By facing the shadow, we reclaim our right to be whole, to be real, to be fully human. We stop fighting battles within ourselves and start channeling our energy toward creating lives of meaning, depth, and connection. Carl Jung did not promise that confronting the shadow would be easy, but he promised it would be worth it. And those who have walked the path, he outlined those who have dared to descend into their own darkness and return often describe it as the most liberating, transformative experience of their lives. It is there, in the places we least want to look, that we find the treasures we most desperately seek. It's easy to think of archetypes and the shadow as abstract concepts reserved for psychology textbooks or late-night philosophical debates. But the truth is, they are constantly shaping the choices we make in our everyday lives, often without us even realizing it. Archetypes and shadow dynamics aren't just academic ideas. They are alive and active, influencing the careers we pursue, the friendships we cherish, and the people we fall in love with or find ourselves unable to leave, no matter how hard we try. They operate in the background, quietly steering the wheel, and until we become aware of their influence, we are like actors performing a script we didn't even know was handed to us. When it comes to choosing a career, many people assume their path is purely a result of conscious decisions, interests, skills, market opportunities. But underneath those logical factors, powerful archetypal forces are at play. Someone drawn to medicine, for example, might be embodying the archetype of the healer. It's not just about liking biology. It's about answering an ancient call to alleviate suffering, to restore balance, to nurture life. Similarly, someone who feels compelled to become a soldier or a police officer might be channeling the warrior archetype, driven by a deep, almost instinctual desire to protect, to fight for justice, to bring order out of chaos. Even creative careers often mirror archetypal patterns. The artist follows the creator archetype, seeking to manifest beauty and truth out of nothingness. The entrepreneur rides the wave of the explorer, the pioneer risking the known for the thrill and promise of the new. And sometimes, it's the shadow aspect of an archetype that lures us. A politician seduced not by service, but by power, may be acting out the darker side of the ruler archetype, craving dominance and control rather than wise stewardship. Our choice of friends is no less influenced by archetypes. Often, we are drawn to people who reflect parts of ourselves that we value or aspire to develop. We might find ourselves endlessly attracted to the wise friend, the one who seems to carry ancient knowledge and offers us guidance when life feels overwhelming. Or we might gravitate toward the trickster, the friend who is always stirring the pot, challenging norms, and injecting life with a sense of humor and unpredictability. Sometimes we choose friends who mirror the nurturing aspects of the mother or the loyal support of the ally, filling emotional gaps we didn't even know we had. But it's in the realm of romantic relationships that the impact of archetypes and the shadow becomes most dramatic and most revealing. We don't just fall in love with a person, we fall in love with the archetypal role they seem to embody for us. Think of the person who repeatedly falls for partners who make them feel rescued, seen, and safe. Over and over, they are drawn to people who embody the savior archetype, the redeemer, who promises to heal their wounds and shield them from the world's harshness. Take, for instance, someone who grew up in a chaotic or neglectful household. As an adult, they may unconsciously seek out partners who project strength, stability, and nurturing. They believe they are choosing love freely, but often the deeper pull is the unmet need from childhood, the longing for the good parent that was never fully experienced. They are not just choosing a partner. They're trying to complete an old story, to find closure for a script that began long ago. And sometimes, that savior partner ends up being more controlling than caring, or the dynamic turns codependent, with one person perpetually needing rescue and the other needing to be needed. The archetype that initially brought comfort becomes a cage, trapping both people in roles that eventually breed resentment, frustration, and pain. In other cases, couples clash not because they're fundamentally incompatible, but because their shadows are at war. Imagine a relationship where one person is outwardly confident, successful, and composed, while the other is more emotional, impulsive, and unpredictable. On the surface, they might seem like opposites attracting, but underneath, each person is projecting their disowned qualities onto the other. The stable partner may secretly envy the other's emotional freedom, but judge it as weakness. The emotional partner may admire the other's control, but resent it as coldness. Arguments erupt not over real differences, but over the mutual inability to integrate the shadow elements each sees in the other. These dynamics often explain why we have such intense reactions to the people we are closest to. When you find yourself disproportionately irritated, hurt, or enraged by your partner, it's worth asking, what part of myself am I seeing in them that I haven't fully accepted in me? Are they really the problem, or are they simply holding up a mirror I don't want to look into? Understanding archetypes and shadow dynamics is the beginning of breaking these unconscious patterns. It's like turning on the lights in a room you've always stumbled through in the dark. Suddenly, you can see the furniture, the walls, the obstacles, and crucially, the doors. You realize you have choices. You're no longer doomed to repeat the same patterns over and over, wondering why you end up hurt, betrayed, or dissatisfied. Recognizing the archetypes at play in your life also deepens your empathy for others. Instead of labeling someone as needy, cold, bossy, or clingy, you start to see the underlying archetypal energy they are grappling with. You understand that the person who demands constant validation might be caught in the child archetype, still seeking the approval they never received. The person who acts superior and distant might be trapped in the ruler archetype's shadow, terrified of vulnerability and desperate to maintain control. Empathy doesn't excuse bad behavior, but it does give us a richer, more compassionate lens through which to understand it and to decide how we want to engage with it. On a personal level, becoming aware of your own dominant archetypes can be both humbling and empowering. You might realize that you have spent years trying to be the hero, always rescuing others at the expense of your own needs, and recognize the exhaustion and resentment that is built up as a result. Or you might discover that you have lived primarily through the rebel archetype, always opposing authority and challenging norms. But find that beneath the rebellion lies a deep longing for belonging and acceptance that you have never dared to acknowledge. Working with archetypes isn't about putting yourself into a neat box or wearing a new label. It's about expanding your self-awareness. It's about understanding the larger patterns that animate your behavior and your emotions, so that you can choose how to dance with them rather than being unconsciously driven by them. And understanding your shadow is perhaps the most critical step of all. Until you acknowledge the parts of yourself you have exiled, you will continue to encounter them in the world around you, in your enemies, in your rivals, in your failed relationships. You will keep looking for someone else to blame, someone else to fix, someone else to rescue or be rescued by, until you realize the real work has always been inside yourself. Take, for example, the phenomenon of workplace conflict. How often have you seen teams fall apart because of personality clashes? It's easy to chalk it up to differences in communication styles or professional approaches, but often, the deeper reality is that unexamined shadows are colliding. One person's suppressed need for recognition clashes with another's suppressed fear of inadequacy. One person's hidden arrogance sparks another's hidden envy. Without conscious awareness, these shadow dynamics poison collaboration, trust, and morale. But when leaders and teams are educated about archetypes and the shadow, something remarkable happens. Instead of demonizing each other, people start to see the humanity in one another. They start to take responsibility for their own projections. They begin to have honest conversations about needs, fears, and aspirations, conversations that open the door to real connection and real transformation. The same is true in families. Parents often project their unfulfilled dreams or unresolved traumas onto their children, seeing in them either the hope of redemption or the reflection of their own failures. Children, in turn, internalize these projections and struggle to carve out authentic identities of their own. But when parents become aware of their own archetypal patterns and shadows, they can begin to support their children's individuation, their journey to become whole in their own right, rather than unconsciously demanding that their children live out their unfinished business. In friendships, too, archetypes and shadows shape the dance of intimacy and distance. We are drawn to people who reflect aspects of ourselves we are comfortable with, but true, lasting friendship requires the courage to face the ways our shadows interact as well. It means being willing to hold space for each other's imperfections, to celebrate each other's growth, and to challenge each other's illusions when necessary. Ultimately, understanding archetypes and the shadow is not just about improving relationships. It's about coming home to yourself. It's about recognizing that you're not just a random collection of quirks and preferences, but a living, breathing expression of ancient patterns, dreams, fears, and hopes that connect you to every other human being who has ever lived. The journey toward wholeness begins with the simple, powerful act of seeing the hero within you and the victim, seeing the lover and the warrior, the child and the sage, the king and the rebel. Seeing not just the parts you like, but the parts you would rather deny. And realizing that every part has a place. Every part has a voice. Every part carries wisdom. When you understand archetypes, you understand that life is not happening to you. You are co-creating it. You are dancing with forces far older and wiser than your conscious mind. And when you understand your shadow, you understand that your greatest struggles are not signs of failure, but invitations to growth. They are not punishments, but portals to deeper freedom, deeper authenticity, and deeper love. In the end, the choice is ours. We can continue to live blindly, trapped in patterns we don't understand, blaming others and fearing ourselves. Or we can turn on the light, look honestly at the theater of archetypes and shadows playing within us, and step forward not as victims of fate, but as conscious participants in the magnificent, mysterious dance of life. When we talk about the idea of facing our inner darkness, the phrase shadow work often comes up, but for many people, it sounds either mystical or intimidating. In reality, shadow work is neither some arcane ritual nor a luxury reserved for monks and therapists. It is the deeply human process of recognizing, understanding, and integrating the hidden parts of ourselves that we've been taught to reject or fear. It's not about exorcising demons. It's about reclaiming the abandoned rooms of our own souls and turning on the lights. Shadow work asks us to stop pretending that we are only the good, the successful, the admirable versions of ourselves, and to make peace with the full truth of who we are. In doing so, it doesn't shrink us, it sets us free. Shadow work begins with a commitment to radical honesty. And one of the simplest but most powerful tools in this practice is emotional journaling. Every day, we encounter emotions that arise from deep within us: anger, sadness, jealousy, fear, shame, but instead of investigating them, We often dismiss, suppress, or rationalize them away. Keeping an emotional journal forces us to stop and sit with these feelings. It's not enough to record surface events like, had a bad day at work. True emotional journaling asks deeper questions. What exactly did I feel when my boss criticized me? Was it anger, humiliation, fear of being seen as incompetent? Did it remind me of something from my past? Writing without censorship or judgment helps us discover the deeper patterns at play. Over time, we start to see the echoes of old wounds, unmet needs, and disowned parts of ourselves woven through our daily lives. Another essential method of shadow work involves dream analysis. Dreams are not random nonsense produced by a chaotic brain, as some early skeptics suggested. Jung believed dreams were messages from the unconscious, vivid and symbolic expressions of our inner world. When we dream about being chased, about losing control, about strange landscapes or mysterious figures, our subconscious is telling us stories about parts of ourselves we haven't fully understood or accepted. By recording dreams immediately upon waking and reflecting on the symbols, emotions, and themes, we can begin to piece together the unspoken narratives of our inner life. A dream about being trapped, for instance, might not just reflect anxiety about a current situation, but a deeper fear of losing freedom that traces back years or decades. Perhaps one of the most transformative practices in shadow work is the exercise of dialoguing with the shadow self. This means deliberately imagining a conversation between your conscious self and the part of you that holds your denied emotions, desires, and fears. You might write it out as a dialogue in your journal, or even speak aloud when you're alone. The key is to approach the shadow not as an enemy to be defeated, but as an exiled friend who has been waiting, sometimes for years, to be heard. Instead of saying, "Go away," you say, "Tell me what you need. Tell me why you're angry. Tell me why you're scared." It sounds simple, but it can be profoundly emotional. The shadow will often reveal truths that are hard to face, but essential for healing. The moments when you felt unloved, the ambitions you buried because they seemed too selfish, the rage you swallowed because you were afraid of being abandoned. This work isn't just theoretical, it has the power to change lives in real, tangible ways. Consider the story of a CEO we'll call Jonathan. Outwardly, Jonathan was the picture of success. He built a multi-million-dollar company from scratch, was admired by peers, and lived a lifestyle many would envy. But behind the scenes, his personal life was falling apart. His marriage was on the verge of collapse. His teenage children barely spoke to him. His health was deteriorating from chronic stress and sleepless nights. In therapy, Jonathan initially presented as rational, controlled, solution-oriented until one session when he broke down sobbing uncontrollably after being asked a simple question. When was the first time you felt you had to be perfect to be loved? As the sessions progressed, Jonathan began to realize that his entire identity had been built around the warrior archetype, the relentless fighter, the achiever, the one who conquered obstacles through sheer force of will. But underneath that polished exterior lived a terrified child who had learned early on that mistakes would lead to rejection. His shadow was filled with shame, vulnerability, and a desperate need for unconditional acceptance. For years, he had pushed those feelings away, focusing instead on winning, proving, achieving. His success was not built on joy, it was built on fear. Through emotional journaling, dream analysis, and dialoguing with his shadow self, Jonathan began to reconnect with the parts of himself he had buried. He allowed himself to grieve the childhood he never really had. He admitted to himself first, then to his family that he was scared and exhausted. He apologized for the ways he had been emotionally absent, rigid, and demanding. He started setting boundaries at work, prioritizing rest, spending real, present time with his children. His marriage, once brittle and strained, slowly began to heal as he showed up not as a distant provider, but as a vulnerable, authentic partner. Jonathan's story illustrates a critical truth. The shadow is not the villain of our lives. It becomes destructive only when ignored. When acknowledged and integrated, the shadow becomes a wellspring of creativity, empathy, strength, and connection. The very traits Jonathan had suppressed: sensitivity, fear, tenderness were the traits that ultimately saved his relationships and, arguably, his life. The work of integrating the shadow doesn't end. It's a lifelong conversation with ourselves. Just when we think we have faced everything, life will throw new challenges, new roles, new losses, and new desires that stir different parts of the unconscious. Every major life transition, becoming a parent, losing a loved one, facing illness, retiring, falling in love again, brings new aspects of the shadow to the surface. The invitation is always the same: to meet these parts with curiosity rather than judgment, with compassion rather than condemnation. It's important to understand that doing shadow work doesn't mean indulging every dark impulse or excusing bad behavior. It means taking responsibility for your entire self, the noble and the ignoble, the brave and the cowardly, the generous and the selfish. It means saying, yes, I am capable of anger. Yes, I have hurt people. Yes, I have wanted things I'm ashamed of. And I still choose to live with integrity. Real maturity is not about eliminating imperfection. It's about integrating imperfection into a greater whole. In popular culture, we often see simplified versions of this idea, but occasionally a story gets it right. In the Pixar film Inside Out, the young protagonist's journey is not about banishing sadness, but learning to integrate it alongside joy. In Star Wars, Luke Skywalker ultimately becomes a true Jedi, not by destroying his fear and rage, but by acknowledging them, choosing not to be ruled by them, and moving forward with greater wisdom. The heroes who merely destroy their enemies without confronting their own darkness rarely find lasting peace. The ones who win lasting peace are the ones who transform from within. In the end, the greatest triumph isn't to conquer the shadow like some external enemy. The greatest triumph is to befriend it, to sit down with the parts of ourselves we have feared the most and say, I see you. You are part of me. You have something to teach me. This act of acceptance does not weaken us, it strengthens us. It frees up the enormous energy we once spent suppressing, defending, and pretending. It allows us to move through the world with greater authenticity, resilience, and compassion. Every person you admire for their wisdom, their depth, their kindness, they have walked through the valley of their own shadow. They have faced their fears, admitted their flaws, grieved their losses, and emerged not as flawless beings, but as fully human ones. Their light shines brightly not because they banished the darkness, but because they integrated it. And so the question isn't whether you have a shadow, you do. The question is whether you are willing to meet it. Whether you are willing to stop fighting yourself and start listening. Whether you are willing to take the harder, braver road, the road that leads not to a sanitized, safe version of yourself, but to a full-blooded, wholehearted existence. Because the truth is, the shadow will not be banished. It will not be outsmarted or overpowered, but it can be understood. It can be loved. And in that love, you find something greater than safety. You find freedom. After all the exploration, after all the inner battles and raw honesty, we come to perhaps the most difficult and liberating truth of all. The darkness within us is not our enemy. It was never the villain of the story. It is, and has always been, our teacher. In a culture obsessed with light, with positivity, with success, with beauty, we are taught early and often to fear anything that does not fit the picture. Sadness is labeled weakness. Anger is called dangerous. Fear is seen as failure. Vulnerability is dismissed as fragility. We build lives trying to outrun these parts of ourselves, erecting walls of achievement and perfection to keep them out. But no matter how fast we run or how high we build, the darkness follows. It follows because it is not separate from us. It is us. It is the cry of the wounded child, the fury of the betrayed lover, the longing of the forgotten dreamer. It is every part of ourselves that once dared to reach for love, safety, freedom, and was told, somehow, that it was wrong to do so. The darkness holds our pain, yes, but also holds our power. It holds the intensity of our passions, the depth of our empathy, the richness of our imagination. When we exile it, we live in half light, half life. We trade aliveness for safety. We numb ourselves to grief, and in doing so, we numb ourselves to joy. We silence our anger, and with it, we silence our ability to set boundaries and fight for what matters. We bury our fear, and we lose our awe, our curiosity, our humility before the great mysteries of existence. The darkness is not here to destroy us. It is here to remind us who we are. It is here to bring us back to ourselves. When we learn to turn toward it, when we learn to sit with it instead of fleeing, we find that it is not a monster, but a mirror. It shows us where we have been hurt. It shows us what we have been taught to deny. It shows us the parts of ourselves that are crying out not for annihilation, but for integration. Not for punishment, but for compassion. Not for defeat, but for understanding. Imagine a person who has spent their whole life running from their anger. They tell themselves they are easygoing, laid back, that nothing ever really gets to them. On the surface, they are pleasant, agreeable, well-liked. But underneath, resentment festers. They struggle with passive aggression, with sudden bursts of inexplicable bitterness, with chronic fatigue from carrying the weight of so many unspoken grievances. One day, life forces them to confront a betrayal, a loss, a breaking point they can no longer ignore. And when they finally allow themselves to feel the anger, to listen to it, they discover that it carries not just rage, but wisdom. It tells them where their boundaries were crossed, where their needs were dismissed, where their voice was silenced. It gives them the energy to reclaim their dignity, to advocate for themselves, to live more authentically. The anger was never the problem. The denial of it was. Or think of someone who has lived in fear of sadness, equating it with failure or weakness. They push it down with work, with distractions, with relentless busyness. But grief cannot be outpaced forever. Eventually, it catches up through illness, through burnout, through an inexplicable emptiness they cannot shake. When they finally stop running and allow themselves to grieve, they find not an abyss, but a river. A river that, though painful, carries them back to connection, to love, to meaning. Their sadness was not a threat. It was a bridge to their own heart. This is the secret so many never discover, that the parts of ourselves we fear the most are often the ones we need the most. The parts we call dark are simply the parts waiting for light. And light, in Jung's sense, does not mean superficial positivity. It means consciousness, awareness, acceptance. To bring light to something is not to bleach it or sanitize it, but to see it fully, to embrace it as part of the whole. The people who seem the most alive, the most magnetic, the most deeply at peace, are not those who have eradicated all their flaws. They are those who have embraced their flaws with open arms. They have walked through their inner storms and emerged not as sanitized versions of themselves, but as whole, integrated beings. They do not pretend to be perfect. They do not waste energy on facades. They live from the inside out, grounded in the truth of their own complex, messy, beautiful humanity. They have learned what Jung meant when he said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Enlightenment is not about floating above the human experience. It is about plunging into it fully, fearlessly, and finding the divine not in escape, but in embrace. It is about recognizing that every tear, every scar, every trembling, yearning part of us is sacred. That wholeness is not about purity, but about integration. The work is never done. Every day, life invites us to deepen our relationship with our darkness. Every heartbreak, every failure, every moment of jealousy or fear or rage is not a detour, but a doorway. A doorway into greater compassion, greater resilience, greater authenticity. The darkness will keep calling, not because it seeks to trap us, but because it seeks to free us. It will keep whispering, "Come home." And every time we answer, we become a little more ourselves. a little more alive, a little more capable of giving and receiving the love we so deeply long for. There's a quiet, fierce kind of joy that comes from no longer being at war with yourself. A joy that says, I am not perfect, but I am whole. A joy that allows you to meet others not with judgment or comparison, but with empathy and grace. A joy that radiates not from having conquered life, but from having surrendered to its mystery. In this way, the darkness becomes not just a part of our journey, it becomes our greatest teacher. It shows us where we have forgotten ourselves. It brings us back to humility, to humanity, to hope. It reminds us that we are not here to be flawless icons, but living, breathing, evolving souls. It invites us to step off the endless treadmill of self-improvement and into the sacred dance of self-acceptance. When you look back at the moments that changed you the most, that shaped you into who you are today, you will likely find that they were not moments of ease and certainty, but moments of struggle, of loss, of profound vulnerability. You will find that it was not the absence of darkness that forged your character, but your willingness to walk through it. And so, the invitation stands, not to banish your darkness, not to fear it, but to meet it as an old friend, to sit with it, listen to it, learn from it, to recognize that your darkness and your light are not enemies, but partners, each giving meaning to the other. That your wholeness depends on your willingness to hold both. The greatest heroes are not those who slay dragons, but those who befriend them. The greatest victories are not won on battlefields, but in the quiet, courageous moments when we choose to love the parts of ourselves we were taught to hate. The greatest freedom comes not from dominating the shadow, but from dancing with it. You are not broken. You're not wrong. You are not alone. You are a masterpiece in progress, a living testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Your darkness is not a flaw in your design. It is a vital part of your story. It is the soil from which your deepest growth will spring. So take a breath. Turn inward. Say hello to the parts of yourself you have been running from. Welcome them home. And know that in doing so, you're not diminishing your light, you are making it whole. Before we wrap up, if this message resonated with you, if it stirred something deep inside you, I invite you to take a moment to support this journey. Please like this video if you found value here. It truly helps us reach more people who are seeking healing and growth. Share it with someone you love, someone who may need to hear that they're not alone in their struggles. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, so we can continue walking this path together, exploring the depths and heights of what it means to be human. And if you feel especially moved, you can send a super thanks to help us keep creating content that aims to touch, transform, and empower. Every bit of support means more than you know. Thank you for being here. Thank you for having the courage to look inward. I can't wait to see you in the next chapter of this beautiful, messy, extraordinary journey we call life.